Informs, the largest association for the decision in data sciences, provides the following audio content to journalists for their use in reporting with proper attribution. What follows are 4 questions and responses from Chris Tang. He's a distinguished professor at UCLA, the Edward W. Carter Chair in Business Administration, Senior Associate Dean Global Initiatives, and Faculty Director at the Center for Global Management. Question 1. As we look forward to 2022, are our current supply chain problems a new normal, or is this a short-term issue?
Well, actually, I think that is both. We have to take a step back to understand the supply chain problems and the underlying root causes. On the short-term basis, you can think of ways to manage the ports or the supplies better. We can get it resolved. But in the long term, I think we have a systemic problem that we need to address.
Question 2. What kind of supply chain problems can be resolved more quickly as we go into 2022?
In the short term, I think that there are many things we can do quickly to get those containers that are currently stuck on the West Coast to move them quickly from the port to the terminal, to the warehouse, to the retailers. So, for example, we can get the penalty put in place, which has already happened, and now the containers are moving. So eventually, we can get that addressed. And also in terms of some of the products that only rely on the domestic supply chains, such as toilet paper or some other products, we can actually get it addressed within 2022.
Question 3. What kind of supply chain problems may linger longer into 2022, and why?
Well, I think that we do have a supply chain systemic problem. Some of them, they will linger much longer than 2022. For example, currently we are facing a lot of shortages of semiconductors. Now that one cannot be addressed within a short period of time. So that will linger much beyond 2022. That would mean that products such as cars, electronic toys, and home appliances that require semiconductors. So that is a major problem because the capacity cannot be increased within a short period of time.
Question 4. What policy changes or major actions need to be taken on the part of the government, business, or others to fix the supply chain crisis?
Well, I think that we have witnessed the vulnerabilities of our supply chain during this crisis. So this is a time that we need to think and reflect what has not been working. So I think over the decades of outsourcing, I think it's time for the government to rethink about how to balance in terms of global supply chain and the regional supply chains such that our supply chains will be more resilient. So for instance, I think that in terms of managing supply chain risk, first, we need to identify where the risks lie. So that requires we do the supply chain mapping, and we need supply chain transparencies. Right now, the government, even companies themselves, do not really have a full supply chain visibility. They don't even know who the tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3 suppliers are. So without knowing where they are, what their capabilities are, we cannot even evaluate the risk. Once we have that, that is step 2. That's where the informs community can play a role in terms of run stress tests for different supply chains to understand how vulnerable these supply chains are, and in the events when we face certain type of disruptions, how long does it take to recover? So that is very important. Now, this one requires the government work with the private sector and the informs or universities to really get to collect the right information and to actually change from information to data analytics. That's where informs can play a role. Third, once we understand the evaluated risk, then we have to develop strategies how to mitigate the risk, just in case something happens. So therefore, for example, we can work with the government, like informs, can identify how much of the national stockpile inventory we should have and what type of inventories, which products, and where and how much. We can do that. Secondly, we also need to figure out what are the domestic or regional supply chain capabilities and capacities that we could have. Just in case something occur, then we can actually pivot and actually leverage our regional supply chain capabilities and capacity to respond to disruptions. And the last one, after we figure out the strategy to mitigate the supply chain risk, the last one is using information to actually trigger to respond to disruptions. This is what I call the supply chain dashboard. So in that case, we have to keep track of the information along the supply chain so that we can get an early warning signal, such that the government and the private sector can respond quickly to supply chain disruptions.
Please see the audio content release posted alongside this clip for attributions, soundbite length, and transcriptions. Any other questions can be sent to Ashley Smith, Inform's Public Relations Specialist, at asmith@informs.org.